evidence that you can't prove that it doesn't exist. If that makes any sense.
Well, it seems linguistic to me, right? So for example, I can talk about green things. Green things exist. Is there a greenest thing? Of course. There are green things. Some things are greener than others. By definition, there must be a greenest thing. I wouldn't be able to figure out what it was. Might be the mold on that pizza that I have in the fridge.
I think you ever get there.
Or when I finish playing golf on my Oculus and I take it off and, I see green specks like floating around in front of my vision, and I worry, is this golf game going to destroy my eyesight? And I say, well, I hope not. I keep playing the game anyway, right? But yeah, it gives me a whole bunch of green, sparkly, I think, from the colors of the greens, etc. However, so there is a greenest thing. There's a worse thing. Now think about this. This is scary, right? Now there's that in which nothing greater can be thought. There's also that in which nothing worse can be thought. What would that be by definition? Another movie by Mel Brooks? No. Satan.
That seems so cliche, though.
Well, it seems to indicate something about our language, because there are good and bad, at least from my perspective. And of course, all of this is going to be from the perspective of the individual. By the way, that's something that Boethius says in his Consolation of Philosophy. We realize that everything that we see is from the perspective of the viewer, not the object, right? So that's something we can get from Aristotle. Yes?
So, what's interesting to me there, but we haven't actually talked about what God means. Like, we're talking about all of these other attributes and in different contexts, right? So, the etymology of the word God, like the story of the word God, like we haven't really.
Well, it would be in Latin, so it would be Deus in this particular case. God, I think, etymologically comes from the German because they say Gott. And if you follow the languages up, like from Germany, up through the Netherlands, up into the Norway and that area, and then over to England, you can see a continuation and somewhat of an evolution from the way they say the different words, so that you can see where it seems like it comes from.
It means good, though, right? Pretty much. It's come to mean good, though.
I suppose. I'm not sure. But in Latin it would be bonum, the summum bonum, which is actually the motto. Actually, for the university, our motto is ad summum, which means, and then usually you'd see the picture of Denali, and it means to the top. So theoretically, by coming to this university, you will reach the top. Language is fun, obviously. I have a lot of fun with it. So this is, the argument seems to be linguistic, that our language requires this to be the case. So, of course, arguments, when you look at Kant's argument, when he describes this ontological argument, he says that it fails because existence to be is not a predicate. So basically what he says is the conclusion of this argument isn't God exists. Well, it is. But what does that mean? That means God is, and then you never say. So you never finish the verb. So in a sense, for Kant, the argument is grammatically incorrect. That he really would have to actually describe what he means by God in some kind of way that we could then evaluate this God, as opposed to just thinking about, well, whatever it is that exists, that's that than which nothing greater can be thought, that must exist. Well, yeah, of course. But why would you call that God? You know, what do you mean by God then? Anselmo, right? You know, what are you trying to say here? Well, he solved the problem for at least one fool himself, I think, because he's convinced, okay, so God must exist. And by the way, today's theologians, when they get into arguments over this is the definition that they use of God. So you might not like it, but if you study theology, you're stuck with it. It's just the way the theologians go. They all end up with this. So yeah, that same problem that we have, but what else do you mean by God? You know, is it a nice God? You know, if I pray to Mary, will Mary intercede for me with her son Jesus, and Jesus has this tight connection with Dad, you know, will that work for me? That's not based on this at all, right? This doesn't help you anywhere in trying to figure out specifics. But it's famous. People go crazy over it. One of the neat ones is Kurt Gödel.
Sounds like he's calling God like, that's not a noun what he's talking about in his definition. It's not a thing. It sounds like a stasis. Like a state.
Well, I would disagree with Kant's critique by saying that it's an incomplete sentence, by pointing out that followers of Kant, like Hegel, argue, of course, existence is a predicate. This pair of glasses exists. This pair doesn't. Makes sense? Bring these glasses, these won't help you.
It's important to be able to see them.
I suppose.
But it'll always be more powerful to the mind to be able to see that something exists. We can see.
What does that mean to the blind man?
He can see him with his mind's eye.
See with touch.
Are you okay? I see some of you rubbing your head like, oh, my head hurts. It is that kind of argument. I mean, it's, one of those intuition pumps, as Daniel Dennett calls it, that you think about it and, it doesn't help, if you're arguing with someone who doesn't believe in God. Well, of course God exists. In fact, there's a neat interview between Daniel Dennett and Charlie Rose. Charlie Rose, he used to be a very popular nighttime host until apparently women complained that he was doing something to them. And as a result of that, he got kicked off the air, etc. That happens to people. In any case, during the interview with Daniel Dennett, talking about God not existing, Dennett pointed out, well, if you're using the definition of God in Anselm's argument, well, of course God exists. But no one really discusses God this way. Everybody wants to think of God as God's on my side, not your side. And that's like, wait a minute. You follow theology, there's no side here. God's not on one person's side and not on the other person's side. That's physics, maybe, the size of your territory, how many people you have to throw in as cannon fodder as you're attacking a much smaller country. Okay. So, well, this is Kurt Gödel. Kurt Gödel, notice, is a contemporary. In fact, my favorite book about Kurt Gödel is by Rebecca Goldstein, and that book is called Indeterminacy. However, he's one of the two mathematicians or two scientists or whatever you want to call them that the government recruited and housed at Princeton and created the Math Institute for them. The other being Einstein, and one lived in one house, the other lived in the other house. In fact, Einstein said that the main reason he accepted and went to Princeton was so he could live next to Gödel and walk to work and back with Gödel every day, which they did, speaking in German and discussing all kinds of interesting issues, I suppose. But so Gödel revised the ontological argument using mathematics, because he was a logician. There are other worlds and rational beings of a different and higher kind. The world in which we live is not the only one in which we shall live or have lived. There is a scientific philosophy and theology which deals with concepts of the highest abstractness, and this is also most highly fruitful for science. Religions are for the most part bad, but religion is not. And here's his argument, which is indecipherable to most folks. But the conclusion is there exists an X such that X is God. So you can see the conclusion: God exists.
Yes, indeed.
This is if then, so God, or actually equals, for anything you pick, if it's P, then, well, let's forget it.
So that makes sense. X is a variable, God is a ever-changing
Predicate.
or a relative quantity and quality.
So, Kurt Gödel, Anselm of Canterbury. Okay, but I didn't want to just stick with Anselm's argument, and look, I've only got like 20 minutes left, so let me quick talk about some other folks. So some other examples of the Middle Ages that are kind of famous. Hildegard of Bingen was an abbess. She was having visitations by the Blessed Mother when she was just a little girl. Her mother took her to the local bishop. The bishop evaluated her and decided, yep, she's being visited by the Blessed Mary, and so sent her to the convent. So she was installed in the convent, Benedictine convent, which meant she was basically locked in a room with another girl with only a little brick area window where they could give her food. And from that little brick area, she could hear the nuns when they were singing. So the two of them were locked up, basically, bricked in. I know, that sounds crazy. They actually did that to a lot of people. In the back of the church especially, they usually had like a whole person bricked in. In fact, they would brick you in such a way that you couldn't even lie down. You couldn't get out. So basically, you were being tortured for however long you lived in that space. And your job was to just pray for, the world the whole time. In any case, the other girl died, but Hildegard lived and was eventually then became a nun, and eventually became the head abbess. And she continued having her visitations from the Blessed Mother, and so she ended up, of course, you see she's a mystic, visionary, and wrote music. And so if you're interested and you look it up, you'll find that she did a lot of music, which is really quite beautiful. Of course, some of it has been souped up by different organizations, bands, orchestras, so if you hear instruments, that's not the way she designed it originally. And they're all hymns to Mary. So that's interesting. There's also movies about her, by the way. Her work